What if the tools designed to connect us are secretly creating division and draining your mind?
If you're spending a session of a couple of hours, which is sadly quite common, that must be quite the rewiring going on. We scroll at such speed and we go from farming in Texas to football hooliganism to something in Ukraine, all in the space of about 25 seconds. Physical is back because people need that, because it's just not enough to do it, sticking content out there. All of these things aren't coincidental. We need to feel something again. Everything else has become the speed of that ceaseless scroll, and as you say, it's pretty exhausting. There is a yearning to find these solutions where, frankly, they've just been handed a problem. They've been handed insanely addictive, beautifully engineered tech.
Welcome to Decisions That Count. I'm neuroscientist Dr. Sean Watson. Today, we confront the unforeseen cost of connection, looking at how ethical decisions and digital influence impact all of us and how to maintain our cognitive autonomy.
And I'm Michelle O'Brien, and today our guest, James Kirkham, is a serial entrepreneur and was at the forefront of social marketing, and now a cultural critic grappling with the platforms that, honestly, we help populate.
We're going to dive into the complex decision-making around digital ethics, cognitive overload that comes with being constantly connected. And we're going to look at the profound responsibility of the influence market.
James, welcome to Decisions That Count.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
It's so good. And we're in London. We're doing a mini series here. And yeah, it's nice to be back on home soil.
It's lovely to have you here back on my homeland. How's the jet lag? How are you feeling?
My head's underwater. I'm in a bubble, but it's all right. It's fun. Been running on adrenaline the last few days.
Very impressed.
It's been great, though. We've met some amazing people, had some good food.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But this one keeps filling up at lunch and making the mistake. Let's get into it. You have kind of openly expressed maybe some guilt for, encouraging all of the brands onto these platforms that can often be quite time consuming and not the healthiest places to be. Tell us a little bit about that realization.
Listen, I don't know, maybe guilt's my wrong expression, but I just feel vaguely responsible and part of it because I've been around it from its outset. So, my agency, my first agency where you briefly worked a long time ago, Michelle, it was the first agency in the world to market a television show using social media. We were doing stuff then. It shows how long ago it was on MySpace. I tell young people this now and I look like I've landed from a different era entirely. They look quizzically at me. What's MySpace? But the notion that that's the first time a television show was promoted, it was a show called Skins in the UK. And it broke a lot of marketing conventions. It won countless awards because we did things differently. And then it was about coalescing people around a property and exciting them and finding ways to mobilize them and infuse them. And that agency really was at the forefront of, I guess, digital innovation. And digital innovation became very quickly social media and social innovation. We were also the first agency to drive a television advert using social media. It was in a prime time spot on ITV, a terrestrial channel here in the UK, for, I think it was the precursor to X Factor or Pop Idol or whatever it might be. So it's like the biggest show in England at the time, and there was a TV ad for Mercedes-Benz, and you could choose the ending using Twitter, which was in its infancy too. You could probably say a decade of work was at the forefront of social media. And of course, I don't regret it at all. It was the means with which we did promotion and marketing and advertising. But I am now a man with a 16-year-old boy, and I've watched him right the way from the start. And there's a shift, and there is, guilt perhaps isn't an overly strong word, because I'm just watchful and wary, and he's football obsessed, for example. I remember a couple of years ago, football Twitter is actually still a really big thing. A lot of people don't realize they call it FT, morning FT. They'll say to one another as football fans on the platform. But a year or two back with Musk's ownership, and you could argue kind of what that meant and its weaponization and the slightly concerning sort of lack of moderation. And that's been repeated in other big tech. And I'm not here to slate big tech or anything like that, but it's a concern. I was suddenly putting my head over his shoulder a lot to see what he was viewing, consuming, reading. And I think there's other platforms that are just so insanely well built and so addictive as a consequence that you can't help but feel sort of vaguely responsible, or that my career has been part of that because we just didn't know. I certainly didn't know in 2005, 2006, when we launched Skins, where we would be sat here today in 2025. So the more it's addressed and talked about, and the more small initiatives are done to perhaps readdress the balance or shift it into a better place, I think that's got to be a good thing.
And for me, it was like, I was so excited. I did a degree in creative advertising, and that was around the time Facebook came out. And I was like, you know, my final year project, like I didn't score very well because I didn't go down a traditional route. I was like, right, we're going to use Facebook and we're going to do, you know, looking back, actually, it was like really ahead of its time. But my teachers, lecturers wanted more traditional. They wanted to see the kind of TV and out of home campaign, but I couldn't let it go. And I was so excited about this new medium, but very much from a creativity standpoint. And, you know, moving to London before I came to work for you guys, you know, I was doing the launch of Resident Evil 6, and I had kind of studio full of zombies, and we were doing like interactive Facebook videos where, you know, people would log in through their Facebook and it would pull in some of their data. You know, their missing people posters would have all their friends on it, friends' pictures, and, you know, doing Google Hangouts on air with MTV, you know, a platform that doesn't even exist now. But it was just the excitement and the creativity and the freedom, and knowing that this was where the attention was and people were starting to spend more and more time on these platforms.
But everything you've explained there has got latent creativity at its heart. So even before we get into perhaps the, you know, my feelings of guilt or the damage that it might be doing, I'd love to Sean's perspective, of course, in this show. That was creative. That was a creative era, because that was before everyone was slavishly created solely for algorithms. We were still making stuff to have an impact, to arrest or be exciting, to be passed on, to be shared. You would try and have inbuilt functionality that means I would want to share it with you, and therefore it would be inherently entertaining as a property. We made these games, and so much of what you've just described was fun and creative. And I think even before we get onto perhaps the big troubles, I do a lot of work culturally at the intersection of culture with brands, and I've been saying for probably about 18 months that I think we're in this sea of sameness. The Guardian called it the tyranny of the algorithm, and a few months ago when they reported on something similar. But I personally believe we've got a complete flatlining of culture. It's beige and it's vanilla. You speak to top dogs in music and they talk about how we all say we want a new artist, but we don't. We want a pop star who sounds a bit like Dua, or a singer-songwriter who sounds a bit like Ed Sheeran. Algorithms feed what they think we want, and because of For You pages, and because you once saw, and because you liked and recommended for you, because we're so supposedly time poor, we have this quest for convenience. So we go, okay, well, I'll just take that, rather than search and seek, and there's no room for weird and niche. And so everything's started to look the same anyway. So even before we get onto the huge kind of, I think, potential issues and what's going on in young adult brains and worse, I think that's an issue. What you've just described was an era of sheer creativity, but now it's how do we fill this machine so the algorithm works best? That's a shame.
What I learned about all this too is that it sounds like back then it was more about like connections with friends and Facebook and things like that. Whereas, and you tell me this, Michelle, all the time, that like now content is king, because the platforms just want you to stay longer and longer on their platform. And so they won't feed you your friends' content. They'll just feed you whatever they think will keep you on the platform. And that's a switch, right? From when it started, like,
Yeah.
to being like more connections and feel like a community and all good intentions, to like, how can we make you stay on, you know, TikTok, whatever it may be, as long as possible. And that's how they make money.
I keep trying to explain to Sean the game's changed, you know, because he's just like, well, I've got no followers, no one's following me.
Yeah.
I'm like, it
My
doesn't
mom
matter.
is.
Like the algorithm, you know, right now it's one piece of content can get, you know, 1 million views, and the next 2, you know, it's all going to come down to what the algorithm deems is the quality of the content, you know, and is this something people are going to want to see?
And even like I'll follow people and I'll see their content for a bit, but then it changes, and then I don't see them anymore. I guess it's just because I'm not engaging, or like, yeah. So I think it feels like the game's changed for how they monetize our attention.
It's exhausting being a creator, and it's exhausting being a consumer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the exhaustion's a really interesting point, and I know arguably it's fundamental to some of the things we're talking about today, but the algorithmic control of sort of platform like TikTok, it's engineered so brilliantly. But it's the ultimate broadcast medium. We describe it as social media. It's not social. There's no discourse. The era Michelle was describing was social. I'm not saying, oh my God, it was so good then, but it was a back and forth. It was a conversation. There was a community of sorts. Unsurprising that right now people are seeking out real physical spaces more than they've ever done before. They're seeking out in real life experiences more than ever. They need to have a physical sense of belonging. They need to go to retail spaces together that have a sense of a cultural belonging, of identity. They need to, vinyl is going through the roof, cassette sales are up 20%, magazines are back. Like, all of these things aren't coincidental. We need to feel something again. That might then inspire or fuel what goes on social platforms, online places. But that isn't coincidence. We need that because everything else has become the speed of that ceaseless scroll. And as you say, it's pretty exhausting, literally.
So is that what's happening? I didn't know that kind of cassettes were back and
big time
and magazines and stuff. That's cool.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, I love all of that. I think it's a really good thing. I think there was a little while 5 years ago with things like vinyl, people had assumed was the preserve of middle-aged man or woman reliving their past and buying an old Beatles LP. It's so much more now. Vinyl is deliberately a product that record labels use to spike sales. Like, they can predict their next DSP, Spotify streams to within a stream over the next 3 years on average. They are so well honed and understood. So when they want to spike, their P&L during the year, they will do a limited edition vinyl release. Such is the impact it can have at that scale. It's massive. And yeah, cassettes are back. Physical is back because people need that, because it's just not enough to do it sticking content out there. As we all know, whatever it is you're trying to do or push or market, if you are solely playing a digital content game, it's a staggeringly hard thing to do. And like you mentioned, something can blow up on TikTok tonight, but the kind of hidden secret of record labels is that they don't really know what. Some of the best people I know in A&R go, no one really knows at the moment. It's not like it once did, and they certainly can't curate that moment like they used to. But some kid in their garage could be massive by tomorrow morning, and I love that about the platform. It's all the other bits that I think have a concern.
A recent study came out, and I threw it up on LinkedIn. Like, this is impactful. People, this article is going to be one of the most important posts I do on LinkedIn. It didn't go anywhere. No one paid attention. But what it showed was actually that the researchers looked at taking away people's internet for a couple of weeks. So they kept their phone, just no internet. You couldn't connect to all these different platforms, right? And I mean, long story short, everybody was happier. They're exercising more. They seem to be getting out. But one remarkable stat is the people who were suffering from any types of depression or whatnot, the benefit of just a few weeks without internet connection on their phone, it was statistically more powerful to help their depression symptoms than a pharmaceutical drug. Social media is not good for us. I shouldn't even call it social media, sorry. Whatever, like things like TikTok is, and earlier you were talking about your son, how they drone out, it's not good for us. And data again and again and again tells us that. So
that's, I think, and again, you're going to know way more than me. I think people like Jonathan Haidt have done some incredible work into this space. The most illuminating, a bit like you're describing, I think recently, has that it is young people themselves, it is Gen Z, Gen Alpha, in fact, very Gen Alpha, who are actively saying they don't want it. It's very akin to the pushing away of cigarettes and moments like that in our recent human past. They're very aware. It's not necessarily a battle. They're very aware of it. That, for me, feels like a open door for something needed, for a change needed or about to happen. We are seeing for the first time young people tuning out and dialing down and coming off platforms voluntarily of their own accord. There was a study recently, and again, I'm not going to know the stats, I'm afraid, like you do, Sean, but it was of a similar point where they are actively taking it upon themselves to move away from that platform or to spend less time because they understand the damage that effectively it is causing. So I think it's a very good thing when we're in a place where they're almost self-policing, they're almost understanding that themselves. It's not great that 10 or 20 years has been put in by very smart people trying to get them addicted in the first place. But it's good that so many young, smart minds are trying to move away to effectively a healthier disposition.
Yeah, that is good news. Because, like suicide rates and like to be a young woman nowadays is like, I'm a parent too, younger, 4 and 2, and it's terrifying. Like, it is terrifying to see what these or like that addiction and platforms can do, and unrealistic expectations on these poor kids.
But I love your differentiation as well, because I don't know if there's a name for it. and I certainly haven't had this discussion before, but it is barely social media. And like you just said, I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, that this world, TikTok's like cultural roulette. It's changed the game in terms of expectations on cultural adjacencies. So there are good parts to that in the world of brands and marketing. I sort of joke, but it's true. I would never answer a brief in football without looking at its adjacencies like music and lifestyle and culture and fashion. I would never answer a music brief without thinking of how it butts up against sport. TikTok is not responsible entirely, but a big part of that. We scroll at such speed and we go from farming in Texas to football hooliganism to something in Ukraine or some horrific kind of content being fed to us from a war that we feel like we need to be engaged with, but we want to turn off from, to fizzy drinks, to barbecuing in Alaska, like all in the space of about 25 seconds. But I'm not sure if our brains have ever dealt with such speed of switching of that insane roulette, if you like, that is so continuous. If you're spending a session of a couple of hours, which is sadly quite common, that must be quite the rewiring going on.
I mean, this is one of the reasons we start the podcast. It's been an area of my research for a number of years now, is this concept of decision fatigue. And it's basically just, there's a physical limitation to the number of decisions our brain can make, quality decisions. And eventually when you make too many decisions, then your brain will start taking shortcuts. So the consequences of decision fatigue, we've talked a lot about it on this podcast, first is an obvious one called decision avoidance. So you just stop making decisions, or you delegate decisions. This is why after a long day of work, you come home and you turn on Netflix and then you just scroll. You can't decide what to watch, right? Or your partner says, what restaurants? I don't care, you pick, right? Like you're delegating out your decisions, or leaving an email in your inbox because you know that it's going to require you to make a decision. The second consequence of decision fatigue, though, is more sinister. It's like a silent saboteur. It's when your brain says, I've made too many decisions. I'm going to actually just default unconsciously to something that I've done before, a decision that I know is safe or comfortable, or that I know has worked into the past. So you lose your autonomy, actually, because your brain is just defaulting, right? So this could be, instead of cooking a healthy meal, you're like, I have decision fatigue. I'm just going to go and order McDonald's, because that's just the easiest thing to do, right? This is a loan application officer at work in the morning, and decision fatigue hits, and here's another loan. I'm just going to deny it, because that's just the safest decision to make unconsciously. So you see rates of loan denials spike in the morning when they have decision fatigue. To a soldier in combat, when, if they're in theater, they see somebody, they don't know if it's a friend or a foe, and they have decision fatigue. What's the default safe decision for the soldier? To pull the trigger. Inappropriate to do so, obviously. So it affects all aspects of life. And the scary thing is 2 points. Is one, social media, that's scrolling. If you're talking hours, everything that you're talking about is a decision. Right? Swipe, engage with the content, watch it, click their profile, share it, whatever it may be, that's making a decision. And it's not just a decision that's quick or mundane, is because this content is so engaging, personalized to us, it'll usually come with an emotional toll or cost. That's why it hooks us in, right? And when you're emotionally engaged with the decisions, decision fatigue happens more rapidly.
So in therapy, for example, you often talk about the need to refill the well. So if you had something particularly traumatic or dramatic or whatever experiences in whatever recent times, it's like, but how are you refilling your own well so that you have enough there to then give as a dad or a parent or whatever it might be? Is there something similar going on there, where there is quite literally a finite amount? And what is that? And is that like a substance? because I find very fascinating about what you're just saying is, I would always group that as, I must be tired. And it's just a big, broad umbrella bucket of, tiredness, or I don't know why I'm a bit procrastinating today.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that it's a little bit more, frankly, smart than that.
Yeah, I mean, two things to maybe unpack there. So the first is like refilling a well. I guess the important point with decision fatigue is it's physiological. So it's a biological limit to the number of decisions, quality decisions that we can process properly. And we know about this already for like a muscle. You run, like Michelle's a marathon runner, right? At some point, her muscles fail. And we know that. That's just a physical reality of the world. We tend not to think of our brains as an organ that also has similar limitations, which it does. And we're hitting that wall with decision fatigue in modern society, where there's a physical repercussion to just stressing the organ too much. That's the first part. And the second question was
I don't even know what my second
Substance.
question
Oh yeah,
was.
how do we cure it? How do you get bounce back?
I just want the answers now, Sean.
Sold on the problem.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so it was more like the substance, what's going on. So decision fatigue from like a science perspective, the latest theory is basically the communication between our neurons, our brain cells, is where all the good bits happen, right? So the connection between your brain cells is what makes you you. That's where your memories are stored. That's where your personality is that connection. And the connection to happen is it happens from an electrical signal, and then a chemical is released that crosses synapse, the space between, and then that turns into another electrical signal. That chemical is a neurotransmitter. You know, dopamine, serotonin, you've heard all of these before. Yeah. There's hundreds in the brain. What we think decision fatigue is caused by is basically a decision comes down, down the neuron and releases that neurotransmitter. And the important part of that whole process is it needs to be cleared away for a new signal to happen, right? Just like you can't have noise. It's like background noise. You need to make sure it's all cleared away to get a clear signal through. But with decision fatigue is there's so many decisions are happening that it doesn't have time to clear away the neurotransmitter. And so you get noise in the synapse. It's like us trying to have a conversation right now, but there's an elevating air horn in the background. Gosh. Eventually it's going to hit a point that we can no longer properly communicate, right? And that's when your brain says, this network's not working. I'm just not going to make a decision. Or this network isn't working. I'm going to just default to a network that's worked in the past. I highlight that mechanism just to really double click on it's physiological. It's not a failing when you feel like you're procrastinating or something like this. You just hit a physical limitation. And lastly, I'd say that feeling tired. This is where most people are, I think they get a revelation when we explain decision fatigue to them, because it's not tiredness. You can be wide awake and have decision fatigue. Mental fatigue and decision fatigue are mutually exclusive. You can feel very tired and have decision fatigue, or wide awake. But what we default to is maybe it's in the afternoon for you and you're like, this decision is just so hard to make, or I don't want to make this decision. You think you're tired and you reach for an energy drink or a coffee. It's not going to help you. That's what we default to. And quite often when we explain decision fatigue, people click and they recognize it in their own life, saying, I have decision fatigue. It's not mental fatigue.
My gosh, there's so much in that. The idea that is something that ultimately runs out and is a finite amount, full stop, it just feels very revelatory. And you can suddenly see how days get entirely segmented and these decision fatigues occur. And I'm particularly interested, again, I guess, selfishly moving it back into my world, but this, as you called it, this notion of using certain platforms where kids, me, anyone drones out, even the Netflix problem that's almost a meme and a joke of the incessant scrolling until you finally choose one and just go to sleep. But my gosh, that feels so relevant and real now when you describe it in those terms, that there is a fatiguing of those decisions. There's only so many that your body can or your mind can even make.
Yeah, I loved it. Like when I first heard this, it just so many things fell into place for me. And because I just thought it was a capability issue. I was like, why am I so good at these times and not others? What's happening? Why can't I push through? Like I just felt like I was failing at times. And to understand that there is a physical limitation of the brain, and actually if we've got a finite number of quality decisions that you can make in a day, knowing that you're going to start the day with the best decisions, like how are you spending them? And I've completely reordered my day. Like I won't touch social media until the afternoon because I'm not wasting my best decisions scrolling social media. And there are other things that you can do, like you automate your food shopping, meal plan, I know I do kind of three-month training blocks, but I've got everything. AI's done it all, but I know exactly what I'm doing in the gym for 3 months. Like I get in there and I don't have to think. I'm not making any excessive decisions. And then looking at the day and going, right, okay, I've got, instead of a to-do list, it's a decision list. So what are the heaviest decisions that I've got to make? And I make them first thing in the morning. If there's a decision loaded piece of work, like if I've got to do a comms plan where I've got to make hundreds of micro decisions of when and where to meet a consumer, that's a decision heavy piece of work. So that's something that needs to be done first thing in the morning, or I'm going to default to like just doing the same old stuff on the comms plan and probably not having the impact as if I'm doing it with fresh thinking.
I'm stealing all of this. I mean, this is fantastic. Turn on that to-do list into a decision list, I adore.
Yeah.
But even just the front loading of a day, or rather not wasting vital decision-making time. As soon as you reframe it and put it into that, it's like, my gosh, we all know a ridiculous scroll in the morning is time wasting. Yeah. But it's normally just seen in terms of A, I don't feel particularly great after it, and B, I got up early for a reason. Now I'm 23 minutes in and I've basically just been looking at nonsense. And we all joke that we've gone down that wormhole.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But when you then go, no, you've quite literally wasted crucial, like that's just galling and ridiculous that then we should be like that.
There's a cost to it. Yeah. From our own clinical work too, and others have showed it as well though, is it also affects like, because it's your prefrontal cortex. It's like the CEO of your brain. It manages a lot of different things. And that's the space or part of your brain that fatigues rapidly from decision fatigue. It's also like the control center to help you with emotional regulation. And so from our clinical work, we show that like team cohesion declines dramatically. We looked at athletes from decision fatigue. You become more irritable. Your control of your emotional regulation starts to decline. So it's not just that you're, making decisions, it's actually how we interact with one another. So important team meetings should be in the morning, right? Creative activity where you need a lot of input and cohesion in the morning. Makes you think about your kids, and after a long day of work when you're emotionally distraught and something really small triggers you further, right? So it's pervasive.
I find that so interesting now because you're also using, so you're coming from a sheer knowledge and a world of science, but terms are similar, like the notion of noise and clutter and finding that space and being able to cut through. And it's stuff far more familiar with Michelle and what we describe and talk to on any given day when I'm working with brands, consulting with some of the biggest brands in the world. But you're talking about where is that place and how do you achieve that cut through and what can you really do in a moment where people are, when everything is too noisy, and they are advertising problems. When you grew up in a world of advertising and brands perhaps going, 80s and 90s, maybe like I did as a kid and then older. But that was about the art of persuasion and convincing. But I think I'm increasingly convinced that neuroscience in one way, shape or form, be it an understanding of decision making and decision fatigue in the way you're describing today, what perhaps in the early social media used to be more psychology and anthropology even, i.e. how humans interact, but that doesn't exist so much because social is not social. But guess what I'm getting to is they're what you should really be learning now. It's not about persuasion and convincing and basically tricking you into buying our product. It's a deep understanding of basically what the hell is going on inside our brains in order to probably fix or better be suited or not damage. I suspect that might be the next 10, 20 years, actually.
I'm smiling because you're almost there with something. So let's put my evil marketer hat on. So we know that people are, we could identify, if we could use these platforms to induce decision fatigue. Somebody's been on these platforms for 10, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. You then know that they are likely in a state of decision fatigue. So your communications in the morning when you know people, your marketing in the morning when you know people are a bit more kind of aware of their decisions, it will be one form of messaging. But in the afternoon or when you've identified they are in a compromised decision-making state, your marketing communications could be very different.
So do you think that's going on now? Is decision fatigue far better known than me just being like stunned by it in this conversation? Is it, and would a gambling brand, would a energy drink brand then go, great, I'm going to advertise about 4 p.m. because
I reckon of course that happens, right? Time of day marketing happens, right? Mm-hmm. I'd put money on it. Excuse the pun for the gambling. I bet the gambling sites have, they might not necessarily know it's decision fatigue and they might not necessarily know that that's the physiological condition, but I bet they've identified that somebody who's been playing for a long period of time is therefore going to be more susceptible to marketing or promotions or whatever.
What you guys are talking about now, I think, is the future, and it's far more scary because psychology is difficult. Like human psychology is dependent on, your English is very different than an American or Canadian or someone in Asia, right? Psychology is very cultural dependent. But with decision fatigue or conditions like that, like you're starting to hack into human biology. right? It's something that someone in Tokyo will have decision fatigue just like somebody in Austin, Texas. It's identical, the mechanism of action, right? And that's the terrifying part to this is psychology is what you guys have traditionally tried to get into and influence, right? Which is a hard thing to do. It's very nuanced. Whereas this is just basic biology. Like, and that's the scary part is that's when you can start to really.
The worst thing about it is the platforms could induce the condition, right? And then you sweep in and market to them and sell them maybe something they don't necessarily.
And the most effective or scary way for something like this is a slow alteration of opinion, like a political landscape. So if I know after a period of time they have decision fatigue, I can put forward a candidate towards you that you're going to default to something safe, right? And versus something risky. So in America is a great example of this because you have attack ads, which is presented as if you're in a state of decision fatigue, if you see a political person who's very novel, something innovative, but something new that you're unsure about, versus you have a political party or political person who's like, oh, that's more of a safe thing. I trust that decision more. I'm defaulting to something safer. So you can very quickly over time alter someone's political preference. And we know about this again from psychology and content that they've talked about this, but it goes deeper to physiological change. Because then if you see that, oh, I know that guy, I saw him before and I defaulted to that message before and I defaulted to it again and again and again. Now what's going to happen is you can just, dramatically.
What you've just described is a great piece of evidence, for example, why that should never shift. Because, and I'm not saying this is the example, but maybe, for example, you can only ever vote post 7 a.m. when you've been asleep, where a night has preceded that moment most likely. And for example, the notion that you could be scrolling to the point of complete decision fatigue for 4 hours and then cast your vote, in theory, is a worse example. Now, there are a million other far better ones, but the fact that it's so ubiquitous, and again, I'm not sort of blowing smoke, but the knowledge is so all important now. What you're doing, what you're saying, what you're describing, like that needs to be, ironically, you need people then to make the call and make those decisions, don't you? A ubiquitous understanding that, hey, this exists. I mean, I'm going to go immediately home after this and we'll tell my son about it. Mm-hmm. And I really think that's important. And, in the top line version, and even stealing Michelle's daily habits of why would you waste it within hour one when you got so much more you need to be doing? It's like, gosh, that's good.
I think that's it. Like I think the whole kind of role of this podcast is we love the science, right? Like I think even from kind of more of a consumer, and then we've kind of got the neuroscientist here, is understanding that this is physical, that this is a physical limitation of your brain is just wild. And it's relatively new, right? Like our parents didn't suffer from this. I think that's what you always say, right? That this is something new, that it's very rare in neuroscience to have something new to kind of work with and a new problem to solve. But it's also this soul side. It's like, what's going to happen if we stop wasting our decisions? Like I think your son needs to know that his decisions have meaning and they have impact, even the little ones. So like from those micro habits every day that are going to compound to the big life-changing decisions of what university is he going to go to and everything else, and it's that they have weight and they have meaning and they need to be made with intention.
I'm part of a platform that is a social safe haven. It's outside of algorithmic control. It's for athletes to have direct relationships with their fans. It's called Cleats Club. And we set it up with basic tenets and pillars without any of this understanding, by the way. It's very important to say. But we thought it would be nice to have a place where you can scroll all the way back to the start, where you're not trying to fuel an algorithm. You can just see any of the messages that have ever been put out there. We also wanted it have zero social toxicity. Now, as I say, we didn't set out to be antisocial, if that's a word, in that respect, but it's definitely a small cog in a very big machine showing how things can be done. There was a huge piece in the Australian, the newspaper, The Australian, in their business section where they profiled it, because of course, since they passed legislation to take social media off of under 16s, they were showcasing it as an example of how things could be done. The reason I'm going on this slightly laborious part is Michelle, to your point, is I remember a journalist when it came out, they said to me, how are you trying to keep people on the app? Because that's the most obvious question as a journalist in digital media in a world that you know incredibly well. And my answer was, we're not. And they're like, that kind of baffled them. But I said, I didn't know this bit though, but I was just being a bit more instinctive and said, my son's probably having 70, 80, 90 micro dopamine hits a day off TikTok and Snap. And, you know, well done. We have people spending 5 minutes on this app and they come 2 or 3 times a day and that's it. They don't need to come anymore. And I joke and then go outside, play in the trees, go and play football. It doesn't matter to us. We want you to do other stuff. What I love is starting to tie this, what perhaps was instinct, more into the science of what you're describing. And I suspect the more people we're going to know what you two are and you guys are talking about, I think people are going to latch onto that in a big way to find the positive and opportunity in what they're making or doing as a consequence.
I think you touched on what I really like, the no algorithm. Maybe one day before you go on something like I'm picking on TikTok, it'll be like, or parents will look for like algorithm-free platforms.
That's so interesting.
Right? And they're not social. Maybe they're just algo. Maybe the warning, like, don't do this for more than 1 hour, or like can cause problems. I highlight that though, just because for
That's
kids.
such a great thought. Like a parent advisory explicit lyric sticker.
Yeah.
This platform is algorithm free.
Yeah, well, I think so. Because then I'll give you a reason for it. One of my biggest concerns for decision fatigue, and being a dad now, I think about it a lot, is decision fatigue. We went through the synapse, right? So it affects the communication between your neurons quite dramatically. For children, it takes a long time for our brain to develop. You're not an adult till you're 21, 22 from like a physiological perspective, right? And a process occurs in your brain called neurological pruning during childhood. So basically you're born with a ton of neurons, loads of synapses, but it's energy super inefficient. You can't support that level of cognitive potential. And so what your brain does over the course of those 20 some years is it starts to prune away things that it no longer needs, just for energy efficiency, right? But how it does those pruning is dependent upon the strength of the synaptic connections. So if you learn a language as a young kid, right, those synapses get strong, they're not going to be pruned away. So you have that ability for language for longer periods of time. Now comes decision fatigue. What is it impacting on a biological level? Our synapses, right? That's what it's changing. There's no science around this at all to date, because decision fatigue, as Michelle mentioned, is quite new. But what is it doing to a growing brain in children to make 35,000 decisions a day? For adults, we see a physiological impairment, right? We see like a deficit in our cognition, and we know it as decision fatigue. But for kids, this could have a dramatic change on the growth of their brain, right? Because we're affecting the system, and the system is built on how well a synapse works. And now we're overloading the shit out of our synapses, right? Causing them to essentially collapse from a communication perspective. So the big question for me as a parent is, those kids they're not zombies. They're not doing nothing. They're making decisions, and it could have long-term consequences. So I joked about the parental warning, no algo, but like maybe that is what we need to see or have, because as a parent.
If nothing else, Sean, that's a great campaign that someone's going to steal immediately.
James will steal immediately.
Yeah, when I say people, it'll be out by this afternoon.
just credit the science would be great.
It's so powerful what you've just said, though.
Well, and it's just because the science isn't. It's one of these things though that, like, when cannabis became popular in Canada and legalized in the United States, right? And then people are like, oh well, I have morning sickness and I'm pregnant, I'm going to smoke marijuana. And any neuroscientist could have been like, that's a bad idea. Right? But they're like, well, there's no science for it. Well, like, yeah, but there's no science for holding a grenade. And like, you don't need clinical trials for some of this stuff. And so to me, it's just the writings on the wall for the impact. Psychology, we know a lot about the impact of social media and these platforms on children. But physiological, we haven't thought about yet, how it could change their biology. And it seems to me like the writing on the wall, we're just waiting for more information. So that's the scary thing for me is our kids, because we haven't, most parents, including myself until I got into this field, and again, it's really new, is it's not on anybody's radar as a parent. We're not thinking of it in that respect.
Yeah, it's the long-term effects as well. Like, so Sean's area of expertise is dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, kind of the background. And you know, this overuse of our brain, you know, what's that going to lead to? You know, like we said earlier, this is a relatively new problem. This problem's 15, 20 years old, you know, but we haven't seen the long-term effects. Is this are we going to be seeing more dementia? Is something else going to happen? You know, what's the consequence of this?
A foundational theory of Alzheimer's or any neurodegenerative condition is what we call excitotoxic injury. It's basically when your neurons are communicating faster, they're not clearing away because they don't know when to turn off. So if there's lots of signal, if it's happening too often, it can cause injury to your brain itself. But that's from the aging perspective, right? That's, you know, when we're quite old and generally our health, brain health has declined. We're not thinking about it from younger kids.
I would love to see the studies in the coming years, and probably with the likes of you guys, of how these things align, because it feels then not entirely coincidental that so many young people are seeking alternative. They are tuning out of platforms for the very first time. For example, like the first time in social media history, they are dialing down and turning off platforms, having only just added them in the past, or they're looking for small, like, you know, I read something recently that we spent a decade or nearly longer now looking how to go viral, but now people are almost trying to purposely go quiet. And how do we find these small spaces, and how do we exist in only micro communities, and how do we go to a physical micro community like space that is just for us and people a bit like us, and we don't need to be mass and amongst 10 million and witnessing what we witness. And so these things feel like they've come from all different directions, and I suspect they have, but I like the way it feels like the direction is ultimately the same to the one that's necessary with what you're describing. Now, this is small. This isn't happening en masse. I think we've got far bigger problems than we've got answers. But again, it feels like certainly amongst the young, there is a yearning to find these solutions where, frankly, they've just been handed a problem. They've been handed insanely addictive, beautifully engineered tech. However, these steps can be made, be it through product, be it through understanding, be it through knowledge, but there needs... And even little things like, yeah, and we are very humble. I think there'll be tons like it, and they'll have different, but absolutely small things that can improve. You can have an experience, for example, with an athlete, but it doesn't have to be toxic. You don't have to see trolling, and you don't have to be hit up with adverts that you don't want all day long, and it can be additive rather than addictive. And those things feel quite standard.
I hope that's what happens. I hope that's the way it goes. I do wonder if it will be classist, in the sense of if we will see more of kind of like the lower working class kids kind of addicted to phones and technology, maybe versus kind of an upper class who might have like more money, more time, more freedom to be able to give their kids more kind of richer experiences. Whereas kind of lower classes, it's like, you know, working long hours, just getting the kids on technology. I do wonder if that's where we'll see.
Yeah, horribly so, perhaps. It's where knowledge is everything. It's where I didn't know this existed until this conversation in terms of decision fatigue. Now I'm thinking everyone on the planet needs to understand decision fatigue, and it needs to be ubiquitous, and it needs to be, well, LLMs need to train on it. And if kids are growing up using, you know, their GPT as their basically means into life, well, this style understanding and knowledge needs to be a response mechanic so that we can equip young people, whoever they are, whatever their class and wherever they live in the world, can have some basic understanding of that's bad for you. Yeah. Then they can make the choice. You know, waking up and having a fag is not, everyone knows that's bad. Some people still choose to make that choice, and that's a different kind of conversation.
The one question that I did want to answer that you had earlier, and I don't think kind of we fully covered, was what do we do about it, about the decision fatigue? So a good night's sleep really is the only way to clear this buildup of glutamate, this neurotransmitter in the brain. And that's why you make your best decisions first thing in the morning. It's another reason why sleep's really important. I think there's a lot of conversations happening about sleep needed for recovery and everything else, but I don't think we're having enough conversations about sleep and decision fatigue.
And ironic that so much of the sleep time is being stolen because of blue screen, late night scrolling, and immediately waking up and using up all of those valuable decisions that you can make.
Yeah, it's like you've recharged all your decisions, and then as soon as you wake up, you're spending them all. We are working on a product that's definitely not a secret. Like, we do talk about it a little bit on the podcast, and I don't believe we will be the only ones. The literature, how long ago was the literature that started to come out about this?
I think it started to get a footprint 4 years ago. Like when it started to really start to expand beyond just a few labs.
We can't be the only ones trying to kind of find a solution.
It's a big line, but I love it. Like the most impactful cognitive disabler of our time. It's not being tired, it's the fact that our decisions are being lost.
We've got so many productivity drinks coming to market, so many like nootropics and adaptogens that are all kind of saying, you know, we're going to help you with your focus. We're going to help. I think none of them have been clinically proven to actually help with the things that they're selling.
Well, yeah, and it's a great point because the industry is exploding for supplements and nootropics or what do you want to call them. I think it's people feeling it and they're just reaching. Right? Like, why does there need to be so many energy drinks? Because I think people are like, oh, this one didn't work. Maybe this one will. Oh, this one didn't work. This one will. Like, I think they're just reaching for a solution. It's just they keep reaching for the wrong thing because they think it's just being tired, right?
100%. I was about to say that. You are ultimately grasping for an ingredient or an alternative ingredient that works best for you to briefly cure your tiredness in a moment where you might need it most. This feels like a very different conversation because it is. Tiredness as an umbrella term suddenly feels very outdated. So the idea that you can shift something to ensure that decision fatigue is less or however it's best described, that feels fundamental as a difference.
I have to say, like, I do struggle with that. Like sometimes that even though a solution is very much needed and as someone who's super type A and always adding more to my plate, like I really feel the effects of decision fatigue and I'm looking for a solution. But I also think that there needs to be looking at just the volume of decisions that we're making and do all of these decisions need to get made? You know, am I creating more work? You know, living in this having this badge of busyness. That's you know, that having a solution to help me get through that particular day isn't going to help in the long term. So again, coming back to looking at the volume of decisions, being more intentional about the decisions that we're making. I don't know, you know, but I think there's still that part.
I love that. The badge of business as a badge of honor is absurd.
Oh, it's horrible.
It's like as soon as you phone someone, like, how are you? Oh, busy. Busy is the answer. You can't say, yeah, I'm all right. I've done nothing from the day and I feel wicked about it.
Yeah.
People will be like, you all right? Do you know what I mean? You can't say that.
Yeah.
But like the most successful people I know, and even people like we've interviewed too, that are like crazy day traders and like wildly stressful jobs, and they're very, very good at them. They take breaks, like strategic breaks throughout the day. To do nothing,
Yeah.
just because they need a space to make decisions. They need to clear their head to think about the decisions they'll be making. So they've naturally gravitated to making sure that they don't suffer from decision fatigue. They don't necessarily knew what they were doing, but they all seem to gravitate towards strategic breaks.
But what you said earlier, and I'm reinforcing the point, but the irony of that and what you said about, let's say, our parents' generation, every break now, every single break that exists without that deliberate intent that you've just described is filled with scrolling.
Yeah.
So if you're in a queue for the bakery, if you're sat on a tube, there's Wi-Fi everywhere. You can't even go on a plane. I used to love 8 hours in a metal capsule because the world's not there anymore, so it's fantastic. We used to feel and now it's like we've got Wi-Fi everywhere. Oh, really?
Yeah.
You know, and so you are chained in.
Yeah.
And unless there is that deliberate choice made, you are further fatiguing.
Yeah.
You need to live algo free.
Absolutely.
It's good. It's going to be like the next alcohol free. I love it. James, we could keep chatting for ages. And there's so much more that actually we wanted to talk about, kind of you and your work. And we've kind of ended up going down this rabbit hole of decision fatigue, which is great because that's what we're about. But I feel like maybe we should do a part 2.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Couldn't be more interested.
And then, to everyone still listening, watching, if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments. I'll answer if you want, but more importantly, we'll get Sean and James to answer the questions. I'll link to all James' profiles and everything below as well if anyone wants to reach out. Yeah, we always end off this podcast by saying, make every decision count. And this week, every time I say it, I'm like, it's just hitting me harder and ringing more and more true. Think about those decisions and make every one of them count. And we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.